Kia ora koutou katoa. It's good to be back and into this new year. The parable of the talents, I believe, gives us a prime example of how we often see without seeing and read without understanding. We are taught based on our experience of the world to assume. You could call it blindness or cultural blindness. We all have it and we all assume. And the first step towards wisdom is recognizing this blindness in ourselves. An assumption, as in the case of this parable, means most of us read the parable upside down or wrong side up. For we assume that the structure of the parable, rich man, servants, investment, is normal or to be commended. And we assume that we should emulate the first two servants who invested the talents. We assume that we and others want to be rewarded by this rich man. And we assume that the third servant who responded out of fear was not only wrong, but should reap the consequences of his inaction, which is whatever punishment the rich man thinks is just. The gist of the story, which you'll find in Matthew 25:14 and following, is that a rich man goes on a journey and leaves his servants to look after his money. Matthew uses the term talents, which was a unit of currency. On his return, he finds that two of them invested the money and gained interest, and he rewards them. The third servant, though, has hidden the money, gaining no interest. He tells the rich man he was afraid of him because you are a harsh man, you take what you do not deposit. He gives him back his money. The rich man throws this third servant out into the outer darkness. Christians usually assume that the rich man represents God. 19th century clergy said it showed God will reward those who invest money well. Now it's more common to be told that it means we will be rewarded if we put our skills to good use. This is helped by that convenient double meaning English of the word talents. Try reading this story to someone who is unfamiliar with it without commenting, and ask them which character they identify with. When I've done this, the response has been the third servant. He seems to be treated appallingly harshly, and yet he has the bravery to speak truth to power. You take what you do not deposit. Why are we so keen to equate the rich man with God? What does it say about our theology if we assume that a rich and tyrannical figure must represent God? Jesus, though, constantly sided with the poor and marginalized, extending his love to all and making it clear that repentance for the rich meant a change in the way they used their money. Furthermore, it is unlikely that a first century Jewish teacher such as Jesus would have promoted usury. Indeed, the sin of usury is the key to flipping this story upside down. There is no way a rabbi, including Jesus, would have been commending usury. What instead if Jesus intended the third servant to be the hero of the story? He tells the rich man the truth about himself and refuses to collude with his unrighteous money-making. The parable then becomes a comment on the sins of inequality. The statement at the end, to all those who have more will be given, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away, is not a word of wisdom for us to replicate, but words for us to weep over. It is a statement of how things operate in the rich man's world, which too often is the world we all have to live in. It's not a statement of how things should operate in God's world. As Waitangi Day approaches, I'm musing on this lesson of seeing without seeing, of assuming and getting it wrong. For I was a teenager in the 70s, and the treaty did not feature in history lessons at school or later in the history department at the university that I attended. It was a relic of the past that, at the time, allowed a largely peaceful transition to British colonial rule. It was not relevant to my life or to the learning, service and governing institutions of our country. I did not regularly hear te reo Māori spoken, and when I did, it was in the form of a haka or a ceremonial thingy. Yet there were others in this country, most of whom were Māori, who saw it differently. Who saw it not only expressing the hopes of the time, but hope for our time. Who saw it holding and affirming two cultural ways of operating, two rich languages, two sets of rights and responsibilities, and how the two would cooperate in a form of a future partnership for the good of all. This understanding of te tiriti has now become mainstream for many people in this land and is well grounded in both the historical record and the jurisprudence of the last 30 years. And I think back to those 1970 days, and with a mix of astonishment and shame, wonder how we got it so wrong for so long. The truth is simply that my assumptions and the assumptions of the Pātea majority were shaped by a cultural blindness that hid, on the one hand, structural injustice and racism, and on the other, the potential for a rich future of a partnership between the treaty partners. Take flight, my sweet young fledgling, to distant shores which will challenge you. And you should never doubt yourself. Look inside and dance with the joy of a fantail. Bobbing and weaving, shaking and swaying, spinning and twirling, moving and grooving, moonwalking to the heavens. Fanning out your tail to the world, my one and only sweet, precious child. Precious child, stay close to me. Precious child, never lose your identity. Precious child, embrace your culture. Precious child, it will see you through. Precious child, let it always be our love for each other which binds us together. My sweet, precious child. This is a song encouraging the young to have confidence and pride. Pride in what's inside. Pride in your identity, culture, and love for self and others. This is a song that topped the New Zealand pop charts in 3 decades. It was the biggest seller in New Zealand in 1984, outselling all international artists. It was also well received overseas, particularly in the UK. In te reo Māori, precious child is Poi E. And that's how we know this song. Sung entirely in the Māori language by the Pātea Māori Club. I drove north through Pātea last Sunday with its spectacular coast, derelict freezing works, and iconic Waka Memorial in the town centre. The next day I watched Te Aripia's Kahi's documentary, Poi E, the Song of Our Story, which I commend to you. You can find it on NZTV+. It's a story about a remarkable individual, Dalvanius Prime, among a remarkable people, the iwi of Pātea. It's a story about aroha and determination and community. It's also a story about Aotearoa, New Zealand, a story about how it was in the 70s and early 80s, when one culture and language and way of doing things, English, monopolized nearly everything. And people considered this normal. There's an interesting recording about an hour into the documentary of Dalvanius telling of a discussion with one of his aunties about the song. "I hate it," she said. "It's so predictable. John Rawls-ish." Dalvanius countered, "And what do your mokapuna grandchildren think?" "Oh," she said, "they love it and play it over and over and over and over again, singing along and doing the poise to it." Dalvanius went on to say to her, they, her mokapuna, are making a choice, their own choice, to listen and repeat their own language, Te Reo Māori. The star of our success, says Dalvanius, is Te Reo Māori, the Māori language. Later, the Top twins are interviewed. Jules said, "Poi E changed the face of music in New Zealand. It brought cultures together. It brought that which was submerged by the monopoly of English culture and language into plain sight. But it was a struggle. Radio stations wouldn't play something in a language most people didn't know. But it reached #1 in sales through being played by Derek Fox on TV1's Te Karere. Young people went out and bought the vinyl single, shooting it to #1 before radio stations woke up to what their racism made them miss. Not that they called it racism, but that's what it was, prejudice, acknowledged or unacknowledged bias, and the power to determine what's normal or what's acceptable. The leaders of the 10,000 who gathered recently at the call of King Pātea at Arawahia, dismayed at what they see as the direction of the coalition government, a direction trying to move the trajectory towards Te Tiriti partnership back to one of monocultural dominance. Also call it racism. In the words of the Anglican Archbishop Don Tamahire, who was there and preached at the service, because somebody somewhere has made the political calculation that they can vilify Te iwi Māori, that they can demonize Te iwi Māori, that they can renegotiate our existence and the tonga we hold dear, knowing it will cost them nothing. And yet, at Te iwi Māori, it will cost us everything. Let us be clear where we Presbyterians stand in this debate. We stand with Te iwi Māori. In the words of our moderator, this is who we say we are as a church. We honour the treaty, see relationship at the heart of how we operate, relationship between tangata whenua, the indigenous people of this land, and tangata tiriti, all others who have come here. So we sing with the Pātea Māori Club, precious child, never lose your identity, embrace your culture. Let it always be our love for each other which binds us together. And, I add, brings justice and peace and hope to our land.